Welcome to the Garrulous Gavel. I am Jon Tico. My guest in this episode is Susan Francis, an attorney who is the executive director of the Maryland Volunteer Lawyers Service, which provides legal help for low-income residents in various types of civil matters, including family law, housing disputes, tax disputes, estate planning, and others. I talk with Susan about the gap between the legal services needs of most people and the lawyers available to provide those services at a cost that people can afford. As odd as this may sound, in the United States, we either don't have enough lawyers or we have too many laws. After you listen to my discussion with Susan, you can reach your own conclusion on that issue. And then we get garrulous with Susan about her love of the National Park Service. She's been to over 300 national parks, historical sites, and other locations managed by the NPS, and she tells us about her visit to one national park that resulted in a harrowing encounter with a murderous pack of savage alligators. Well, I might be overselling that story a bit, but it is still a fun story. So please stick around to the end, and I hope you enjoy my interview with Susan Francis. Hello, I'm Jon Tico, and welcome to the Garrulous Gavel. My guest this morning is Susan Francis, who is the executive director of the Maryland Volunteer Lawyers Service. And we're going to be talking to Susan today about the importance of legal services for all of us, for all humans. And, we're going to be getting into this question of how pervasive is the need for lawyers and legal services in our society, and do people actually have access to the legal services that they need? And Susan is someone who's been kind of working on the front lines of that problem for many years, and her organization works on the front lines of that problem. And so she's a great guest to explore that issue with. So good morning, Susan. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me this morning. Looking forward to our conversation.
It should be a fun one. And we're gonna start, as we usually do, by learning a little bit about Susan herself and her background and how she became interested in law. From what I know, at least, Susan has a somewhat non-traditional path into legal services, did some other things for quite a number of years, and then kind of went back to law school at a later point in her career, right?
Yes.
So that'll be interesting, different than some of our guests. So we'll hear that story. And then please do stick around for the concluding segment of our podcast. As always, we're going to talk to our guest about some interesting hobby or pursuit. And Susan is a big fan of the National Park Service and has been to many, many parks and other locations that are run by the National Park Service. And she's going to tell us one particular story about a near deadly alligator encounter that she had down in a location controlled by the National Park Service in Florida. So stick around for the end, to hear that story. So we will start where we normally do, by learning a little bit about our guest. Susan, where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Bradford, Ohio, and none of your listeners will know where that is. That is a very small town. It's actually not even a town, it's a village in rural Ohio over by the Indiana border.
And how long did you live there?
Until I went to college. Okay. So my grandparents are from there, my parents are from there, and I lived there until I headed off to college.
And is it sort of a farming community?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Farming community.
Uh-huh. And when you were growing up in that small, not even a town village in Ohio, were the seeds of your interest in law or pursuing a legal career planted? No pun intended?
Wow, that's impressive on the spot like that. Yes and no. No, in terms of where I grew up. Most of the folks that I grew up with didn't pursue any higher education. I didn't know any attorneys. I didn't really know folks that had pursued higher education. I was actually the first person in my family to go to college. So nothing in my external environment made me sort of planted that seed, but there was something always inside of me that always knew that I wanted to be an attorney. I just didn't think folks like me from this little rural community were attorneys.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm always curious to know, like, people who sort of are able to kind of break away from maybe the life they were born into. What was it about you that you think made you different from the majority of the people you were growing up around? Maybe. I mean, is there some reason why you were the first?
Yeah. I don't know. I ask myself that a lot. I think that there are two things at least contribute to it. One, my mom was so proactive about education and reading to me when I was really early, making me very curious, always really, I did really well in school and just really, encouraging that and making that a priority. And then secondarily, my parents traveled a lot, and in very affordable ways. My mom was a secretary, my dad was a security guard. We actually, and I didn't realize it at the time, they really seeded my love of the national parks, and it's because it was really cheap to go there, and so we would go to the Great Smoky Mountains every year, and it started to show me that there was this whole world and all of these different people and different communities, and it started making me very curious about beyond the village in which I grew up in.
That's interesting. So you think sort of early travel experiences kind of expanded your mind a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So at some point you decided you were going to go to college and at least pursue some higher education. So where'd you do your college?
I went to Ohio University, and that is not the Ohio State University. So Ohio State University is the big one. That's the Buckeyes. I went to Ohio University, which is the Bobcats. And the reason I went there, one, I needed to go to a public and state school for affordability. It was the farthest away from my hometown. And they had a really strong journalism program, and that's what I was going to get my degree in.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. So you went to college thinking maybe journalism was the path for you.
Yes.
Is that what you pursued in college?
Yeah. So I graduated with a journalism degree. I had a specialization in public relations. And it's funny how your paths sort of just depend on what happens. So I accepted a job at a nonprofit. And then like 2 days later, I got a job offer to write it for a local newspaper. And since I'd already accepted the first job, I followed this nonprofit more, communications path than the newspaper path.
And just looking at your bio, I see there's almost a 20-year gap from when you graduated college to when you graduated law school.
Mm-hmm.
What were you doing during those 2 decades when you were wasting your time not being a lawyer?
Fair question. I hadn't even really thought about working in nonprofits either. Like that was not something I was exposed to until I got this. Well, when I was in college, I had an internship for a nonprofit, and it was really meaningful. So then I got this job, and I really focused on fundraising, development work, and communications work. And so I did that in a number of nonprofits over many years, as you've pointed out. Along the way, I got my master's degree also in journalism. I sort of had a 10-year, my 20s, 30s, and 40s between college, my master's degree, and law school. And I've declared I'm academically retired at this point. So I'm not doing another one, because that would be sort of now's the time in which I should be doing it. So that's what I really focused on was communicating about the important and good work of the nonprofits that I was working for.
And were they all in a particular sort of area of work, or was it spread out, different types of organizations?
It was different. I worked for a very long time for a housing and homelessness organization, which is, as we talk today, you'll hear me talking about a lot of housing stuff because it's the thing that I know the most. But I also worked for a preschool program that was with wraparound services for mostly immigrant children in Alexandria, Virginia. And then I worked for Equality Maryland, which is was the LGBTQ advocacy program here in Maryland. So to me, they're all connected in terms of, access to resources, access to, civil justice sorts of issues, but externally, there's not any clear path with those.
So at some point, you got the idea that maybe you should go back to that childhood dream of becoming a lawyer. What was it that made you decide to go back to school and become a lawyer?
It was getting old. I was getting old. And I distinctly remember looking in the mirror one day and thinking, this is something you've wanted to do your whole life. If you don't do this, if you don't go for this, you're never going to do it. And so I said, okay, well, I'm not going to commit to that because that's huge, right? But what if I just said, I'll take the LSAT and see how that goes. And then at each stage, I'll just be like, oh, I'm not going to law school, but I'll just do this thing that will put me in that, that next step, and then that next step, and then the next thing I knew, I was in law school.
Yeah, no, that actually makes good sense. I mean, so for people who are listening who may not know, the LSAT is sort of the admissions test that you generally have to take before you apply to law school. So you have to do that as sort of one of the steps anyhow.
Right.
So you just decided, well, I'll take the test and see how it goes.
Right. I wasn't committing to anything. I'm just going to take the test.
Yeah. I mean, just for fun, right? It's a fun test.
Right. In your spare time. Sure. Yeah.
Now, Susan is talking about this like it's no big deal and no commitment, but it's actually a pretty rigorous test, and most people spend at least a little bit of time studying for it and so forth. So I'm sure you put some effort into it, and you did well enough to get into law school. So I'm sure it was not a tiny task. But I understand what you're saying. And so where did you end up going to law school?
So I went to University of Baltimore. I was already living in Baltimore, wanted to be in this community. And thankfully, I'm very grateful to the University of Baltimore that appreciated my academic work, but also the work that I had done, that they valued, the nonprofit work that I had done over those 20 years. And they gave me a scholarship that completely covered the academic side of my work, which is what sealed the deal for me. It was going to be a really hard decision as someone that was going to stay in public interest and recognizing the debt that comes with law school. And with that scholarship, I was able to quit my job and be a full-time student for 3 years.
Great. And do you think that was a good school for you to go to in terms of preparing you for doing sort of public interest law?
Absolutely. They have University of Baltimore has a very robust clinic program. And actually they just recently did really well in I think it's the U.S. News and World Report that does the rankings. And so their clinic programs are really, really strong. And so what was helpful for me, I did the civil advocacy clinic, and I actually did 2 semesters of it, which is working with low-income individuals on civil legal issues. So that should sound familiar to what I do today. And so getting that very practical experience of working with clients, filing documents, understanding how the court system works was incredibly helpful to have that tangible experience, in addition to just having the foundation that we all need as attorneys.
Did the school let you kind of specialize a little bit? I know law school education is always very much sort of like a generalist education, but did the school have opportunities for you to sort of pursue your interests while you were in law school?
They do now have you can get a certification for public interest related work. I don't think they had that when I was there, but what I was able to do is to focus some of my classes on what I thought would be relevant to the work that I thought I would ultimately end up doing. So for example, they had a poverty law class that was very helpful. because a lot of law school and your other foundational classes, they're not really, as you're learning the law, they're not focusing on how the law impacts poor people. So, for example, when I was in the class talking about secured creditors and debtors, and it was always from the creditor side, like how do you collect from folks, right? Like there was never a what are potential defenses as someone that can't pay their bills. And so it was really helpful to have a class that was very specifically targeted to the individuals that we help in the work that we do.
Well, it is a great law school. I have a couple of personal connections to that school. When I was in law school, my first summer, I had a summer job working for the Maryland Attorney General's office I think it was sort of their healthcare department. And the offices of that department were a few blocks away from the law school, or at least where the law school was. This would have been back in the early 90s. But the office did not have much of a law library of its own. And this was sort of at an earlier phase of the world where we still did a lot of our research out of books. Mm-hmm. It wasn't all just online. And so sometimes you needed a law library. So if I needed to do some research, I would often just stroll a few blocks over to the University of Baltimore Law School. And I think at least at the time they would let anybody who wanted access to the law library
to
just walk in. And yeah. And so it was a great resource. So I spent many hours that summer in the law library. It was probably also nice and air conditioned. Baltimore gets very, very hot and sticky in the summer. Yep. And so I really came to enjoy that library. And then also one of my next door neighbors happens to be a professor there now and has been for many years.
Nice.
So I have those connections to that school. Well, okay. So what did you do after you graduated? What was your first job as a lawyer?
So I graduated in 2011. And if you remember, that was right in the middle of the Great Recession and was a terrible economic time to try to find a job. And so it was really frustrating because I had all this background experience. I did really well in law school and I could not find a job. And so I graduated without a job, which was very scary. But then I was able to find a job with the Administrative Office of the Courts, which does the administrative work of the Maryland Judiciary, working in their family department, doing a lot of research around a variety of kind of juvenile and family related issues.
What was sort of the path from that first job to where you are now at the Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Services?
So I was there for about a year. It was contract work with no benefits. And so, I needed to find something a little bit more sustainable. I moved over to a small firm in Tacoma Park. And for listeners that are not local, the commute between Baltimore and Tacoma Park near Washington, D.C. is truly terrible. And so I did that for about a year. And, at the time, it was challenging. And of course, we didn't have remote work back then. And but it is one of the absolute best experiences I had because it was the other opportunity to give me incredibly hands-on experience of knowing, the basics of how much is the filing fees and which courts can you mail to and which courts do you have to deliver to because which court's going to lose your filings, and just really helpful, practical work that was really, really instructive. And so I hated the commute, and I was looking. I knew I wanted to do public interest work. That was, just sort of part of my DNA. And there was a position that had opened up at the Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service for their foreclosure prevention director, which is a brand new position. We were in the middle of the Great Recession and the foreclosure crisis. And I was so demoralized about trying to find work, and I'd, submitted so many things I was qualified for, and I, wasn't hearing from anyone. And my wife actually found the job. She said, "You need to apply." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm not applying." And then a couple of days later, she's like, "Have you applied?" And I was like, "No, I haven't applied. I'm not going to apply. I'm not qualified. This is just going to be sad." And she just harangued me so much that I was like, "You know what? I'm just going to apply so that you will leave me alone and stop bothering me about this." And that's the job I got at MVLS.
And that's where you've been ever since,
Ever
right?
since. Yeah. Yeah.
So this would probably be a good time to just explain a little bit about what MVLS is and what it does. So that's again, the Maryland Volunteer Lawyers Service. So tell us, what MVLS is and what its mission is.
Sure. So we were founded in 1981, and the idea around our very existence is that there's this huge gap for individuals that are facing a variety of civil legal issues, but they didn't have representation, and so there were a group of sort of different determined folks that came together and said, well, what can we do? And they thought, okay, there are all these attorneys in private practice. What if we tapped into that group and really magnified or grew the amount of attorneys that could be available to help? And that's why we were created 40 years ago. In that time, we've helped over 100,000 Marylanders with civil legal issues. And so our mission today is providing that free legal help. That has always been the core mission of what MVLS does. But over time, we've also grown that to provide the free civil legal services. But in addition to that, to also really deeply provide community engagement, and then also working for equitable laws. So we've kind of grown over time as an organization and understanding what our work is.
So let me ask a couple of follow-up questions to that. So the first is you used a couple of terms there that maybe we should just define for our listeners. So first you say civil legal services. So in the broad world of law, what counts as civil legal services?
So the easy answer is anything that's not criminal is civil. And I think when most of us think about the legal system, certainly as non-attorneys, and I, as you know, was a non-attorney for a long time, what we think about is that criminal system, what we see on TV, the Miranda rights, like that sort of. We're not thinking about civil legal issues, and the reality for many of us is it's the civil legal issues that we're going to actually interact with in our life. So for our program, it's specifically family law issues, housing issues, consumer issues, estate planning and administration, tax controversy issues, and then criminal record relief expungement related issues.
So explain a little bit about who the lawyers are that work for MVLS. I assume that you have some full-time staff. Is that right?
We do, yeah.
And do you also rely on other lawyers who are not part of the organization, but who are volunteering their time to help your clients? Is that the idea?
Absolutely. So we're a fairly small staff. In our entirety, we're about 30 people, but we're able to help over 5,000 individuals a year, and that's because of our volunteers. So our staff attorneys have some cases that they take, but they're also really focusing on those other parts of our mission, which is developing those community partnerships and looking at how laws are impacting the individuals that we work with, and how do we look at changing those laws or how those laws are implemented. So it's really the volunteers that are doing the heavy lifting of all of those cases. And they come from really everywhere. So you've got, your big firm attorneys. The majority of our volunteers are small and solos, but we also have in-house counsel. We have government attorneys. Really, we have retired attorneys. Mm-hmm. We have folks that are, barred but don't even practice as attorneys. So we really have a variety of folks. And then we're able to grow our volunteers a little bit with our tax controversy project, where we also are able to use CPAs and enrolled agents as well.
So this is a sort of an interesting part of kind of legal culture in our country, I think, that maybe most people don't really know about. And that is that there is this sort of part of being a lawyer that we call pro bono service. And, you're kind of taught about this almost from the moment you get to law school, that this is sort of this idea that there is a certain, privilege to being a lawyer and having that law license. And even if you're just going to go do, business law for big companies and make your living that way, that you have some sort of, ethical obligation. I think in some states it's actually written into the rules of professional conduct, but certainly sort of a moral obligation to devote a little bit of your time to providing legal help to people who can't afford to pay you. And so, we call that pro bono service. And there are organizations like MVLS that sort of offer, I guess, ways for lawyers to satisfy that ethical obligation of pro bono service. I think it's just sort of one of the nice things about being a lawyer and legal culture in the United States, that we kind of do take that seriously. And most of the lawyers I know do actually do that. They'll devote some portion of their time to doing pro bono work. I'm assuming that's, kind of what a lot of your volunteer lawyers that work through MVLS are doing. They're looking for an opportunity to do pro bono work, and they see your organization as a sort of a conduit for doing that. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think coming through a program like ours, like I mentioned, we've been doing this for a long time, so we're able to make it pretty easy. So first off, we're screening the client, right, to make sure that they are going to income qualify, their legal issue qualifies. We provide the malpractice insurance, we provide the training. If there are issues that pop up with the client, we help navigate that. And so it's really, we look at ourselves as really having almost two clients, right? Two individuals that we're really supporting, both the client and the volunteer, through that process. And the impact that an attorney can have. I always like to highlight a couple of hours of attorney time can just profoundly impact the life of someone that's otherwise just not going to get this help.
So to close the loop on your professional career, at least to date, not into the future. We can't close the loop into the future. We don't know what the future holds. I'm guessing Susan's going to go back to school and become a doctor at some point in the next few years. But at least to date, you stayed with MVLS, and I guess had a couple of different positions within the organization, but at some point became the executive director. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So I ran the foreclosure prevention for about a year, transitioned into the deputy director position where I really oversaw all of the programs, not just the foreclosure project. And then our former executive director retired. And for a long time, I was like, no. I really enjoy having cases. I didn't want to get so far removed from the day-to-day work of MVLS. And so decided that I probably did have the skills to do this work and had been with MVLS for a long time and still get to take a case from time to time. But the timing was interesting. I took over in October 2019. Of course, 4 months later, our world shut down because of COVID. And so being a brand new executive director, at a time. I mean, I'm so glad that I was with MVLS for so many years and had built the trust and understanding with my colleagues and with everyone else. But it was a tough time to be a brand new executive director, for sure.
So in what ways did the COVID pandemic impact your work?
So we, right out of the gate, we didn't do any remote work at all. We had nothing set up. So we left work on a Friday thinking we were coming back to work on that next Monday. And of course, we didn't. And so over the weekend, we had to stand up a phone intake, our phone intake systems, all of our work systems. And everyone worked remotely except for me for the first 3 months. We completely shut our office down. And thankfully, there was a number of COVID resources available to help us really upgrade our technology so that we could work remotely. We could still keep up with everything that we needed to do to serve our clients, support our volunteers. But it was a very quick learning curve for us. And it's, we're in a better place now. We have a lot more flexibility with how we do our work, but we were not remotely prepared for that.
Yeah, I think the pandemic had that effect on almost every
Yeah.
organization. It kind of forced a change that was probably going to come eventually anyhow, but it accelerated that change to remote work. And I think everybody, I know our firm went through that. There was sort of this need to very quickly pivot how we were doing a bunch of processes, and you needed slightly different technology and all of that. And that all had to happen very, very quickly. So I'm sure that was a challenge for you. Did you find that it also had any impact on the types of legal issues that people were coming to you to help solve?
So at the very beginning, as you know, the courts shut down, and so we really transitioned our focus because folks were falling into debt, but they weren't getting sued, so they weren't calling us for a debt collection case that was coming up, and so we really and what we were getting calls for were where do I get food at, where do I get the most basic services, and so we um, sort of put our legal services to some degree on the back burner and really focused on how do we continue to get the word out about how to get food. There were a variety of moratoriums going on in terms of housing and getting the word out about as those changed. And then we realized with the economic impact payments for folks that are established, it was very easy for them to get their economic impact payments. I qualified for the first one. I didn't have to do anything. Money showed up in my bank account, right? For folks that really, really needed it and that were being harmed the most by COVID, someone that was low income and didn't have to file taxes because they were low income had to take extra steps to get their EIP. If they had moved, it was going to old addresses. If they didn't have a bank account, which lots of folks don't, they weren't getting it. And so we really transitioned to doing a lot of that kind of work. How do we get the word out? How do we help navigate this? Helping folks hop on the IRS website, getting the information submitted so that they could get those really critical resources that they need, particularly at the beginning of COVID.
Well, maybe that's a perfect way to transition into sort of our topic of the day, right? So when you and I chatted in preparation for this interview, and we were kicking around ideas for kind of how to frame what we were going to talk about and how to sort of frame what it is that MVLS and organizations like yours do. The sort of the way you framed it, which I thought was interesting, was, well, let's just talk about the importance of legal services to all people. And I think that kind of is an interesting way to think about it. I think a lot of people think of lawyers and the legal system as something that is primarily of importance to businesses or people who are rich enough to hire lawyers. And you hear about these high profile cases that are going through the courts, or maybe they think of it as the criminal justice system. But that leaves, the vast majority of people in our country who don't own or run businesses, who are not particularly rich, and who are not dealing with the criminal justice system. So, those people, we often don't think of them as needing lawyers or needing legal services. But you say, in fact, they do. And so let's kind of dive into that a little bit. Maybe just give us a taste from your experience of the types of issues that, say, a resident of Baltimore, where you operate, right? A typical resident of Baltimore who is not involved in the criminal justice system, so they're not in trouble with the law from a criminal perspective, and they're not wealthy, they're not rich, they don't own a business, so they don't need expensive corporate lawyers. But what types of legal services does a person like that need over the course of their life from your perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, it's something that I've come to learn in the time that I've, as an attorney, and particularly working at MVLS, it's something I think about a lot, because most of the legal issues I rattled off are often going to cross paths with someone's life. And so, yeah, I don't think of, even as myself, I'm like, well, I don't retain an attorney, like that's what fancy people do. But I've gotten divorced, right? And so many folks, odds are most folks that are married are potentially going to get divorced. They might have a custody issue. They might be adopting a child. Those are legal issues. My father passed away, and my mom was trying to navigate how to administer that estate and how to set things up for me and my siblings, so that when she passes away, how's the house going to pass? So she lives in Ohio. I didn't feel qualified to help her as an attorney in Maryland, and so she had to get an attorney to help her do that. Like we sadly have people that die in our life, right? And there's often an estate issue, either on the front end with planning or on the back end when someone has died. We also, many of us experience crises. So when I started doing the work, the foreclosure prevention project, most of the folks that I was helping was not, if because we work with folks that are low income, many folks are thinking about, folks living in deep poverty, and we absolutely help those folks. But most of the clients I was working with were at risk of losing their house. They had bought a house that they could afford. There's a bit of a myth with the foreclosure crisis that people just had really big eyes and bought way more than they could afford. And sure, some folks did that. But the reality is a lot of folks lost their job during that time. And so they had a house that they could afford until they lost their job or they had a medical crisis. And so all of a sudden they went from being able to afford their house, being what we would think of as middle income folks, to now losing their home and needing an attorney to help them with that process. And so, those sort of the issues that we work out outside of criminal record expungement, which is kind of a separate area. All of the issues that we work on are just sort of life issues, life circumstances that come up for us. And when you can afford an attorney, you're in a very difficult position of how do you try to navigate this on your own.
And I think you had mentioned a couple of other categories, and maybe you could say something about. One of them was tax.
Mm-hmm.
So what does MVLS do in terms of tax law, or what do you think the sort of legal services needs are for somebody in the tax realm?
Yeah, I have to tell you, when I found out that when I joined MVLS, I was like, wow, that sounds really boring, tax. So my apologies to any of your listeners that are like, no, she thinks taxes are boring. Because I have converted to really thinking it's so important to have that tax service. So, it's a variety of issues. But just for example, a number of years ago, I got a letter from the IRS because at the time, my wife and I were not recognized as legally married. And one year she took the mortgage credit, and the next year I took the mortgage credit. And we got a letter from the IRS saying like, uh-oh, what's going on? And it was really scary. And like, I'm an attorney and I work at a program that has a tax controversy project, and I was still intimidated to get a letter from the IRS, right? And so those kinds of things bubble up. But we have folks that, they can't afford. They have some sort of back tax, and they're trying to get an issue resolved with the IRS. It is not uncommon. We have particularly widowed older women that we're still kind of getting past that time where the man took care of the finances and the women didn't. And so they find themselves in their later years with these huge tax liabilities that they didn't even know about, and trying to resolve that. All the way to right now, we have this current project where we're trying to deal with some fraudulent tax preparers. So when you have a fraudulent tax preparer, even if I went to someone that didn't do my taxes appropriately, I'm still responsible for that, even if I think that they did it legitimately. And so we're working with crab workers on the Eastern Shore who have been targeted by fraudulent tax preparers and trying to resolve their tax issues for them, as well as making sure that their taxes are being prepared appropriately going forward.
And then I think the last bucket that you briefly mentioned was sort of consumer issues. So give us a sense of what those are.
So I mentioned about with foreclosure and a lot of medical debts. And so we handle a lot of Chapter 7 bankruptcies for someone. And it's really interesting. I've done a number of bankruptcies, and I've yet to meet someone that's like marching in saying like, yay, I want to file for bankruptcy. Like that's not how people feel. They feel shame. They often just cannot figure a way to get out of their debt. And their debt generally, I don't know that I've actually ever had someone that didn't have medical debt. That was part of the problem. And so it's medical debt, it is credit card debt, and then student loan debt. And we can't fix the student loan debt for them because that's not dischargeable in bankruptcy. But they have no path to get out of that debt. And so we can help them file the Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And it's, when you're asking me about tax and bankruptcy, when we get client surveys back, those are the two, and expungement, the three most powerful responses that we get about like, you've lifted such a weight off me, you've given me another chance, I have a new beginning. And so we do a fair amount of, collection related work of trying to resolve that for them because they otherwise don't have a path forward.
Right. So you've mentioned a bunch of these issues. So I'll just kind of summarize them: sort of family law issues around divorce, custody, adoption, estate issues. It's just somebody in your family dies and you have to figure out how to deal with that. Housing issues around foreclosure. Do you do landlord-tenant disputes as well?
We do some landlord-tenant. In Maryland, most of the landlord-tenant work is eviction-related work, what we call failure to pay rent cases. And those move so fast from, someone being delinquent to the court process is so quick that we actually don't have enough time to find a volunteer. And so we work on some of the other areas around that, like getting your security deposit back, breach of lease cases, some of those other kinds of other issues. And then we also work on tax sale issues and trying to preserve homes that way as well.
But housing issues, tax issues, consumer issues around debt. So when you kind of put all of those things together, it does start to sound like, gee, this sort of group of issues are in fact things that most people will intersect at some point in their lives. And so I guess then the question is, why do we need lawyers though to deal with these things, right? If they are so common and so pervasive in our society, why is it that we have to have lawyers dealing with them? Why can't we just have a system where people can deal with these sort of common, routine, fact of life issues without a lawyer?
Well, that's like the $1 million question, right? So
that's why I'm asking it.
I mean, I think two things, right? The legal system was created by judges and attorneys. So the system itself works okay for judges and attorneys. In addition to that, the cases coming into the system have grown tremendously, particularly when you look at consumer related issues. That used to be a very small amount of cases, and I forget what the numbers are, but it's just just quadrupled and multi-drupled and in so many ways. And so the getting into the courthouse doors used to be a very small pool of folks that was really just judges and attorneys. Those now being pulled into the system, whether it's through the criminal justice system where there's much more incarceration now, whether it's through the consumer related issues, there's just many more folks being pulled into these systems that just simply can't afford an attorney. And there are efforts underway in pretty much every state about how do we make this, if we acknowledge that the majority of individuals, and which is the case in these civil cases, the majority of individuals are going to be pro se, meaning they are going to have to represent themselves. So how do we make the systems easier? And in Maryland, they have taken a number of steps. There are standard forms that someone can use. There's the Maryland Judiciary website has a lot of helpful resources. And so they've taken good steps, but it's still a system that is complicated. and rife for missteps along the way. And so if you have to, the court system has tried to make it better. But, as we were talking about, even an attorney doesn't want to represent themselves in a legal issue. So how in the world can we expect or think that someone's going to get adequate and full justice if they're being left to navigate these systems on their own?
So there clearly aren't enough lawyers in the country to represent everybody, every citizen of the country that needs a lawyer. Would you agree or disagree with that statement?
Well, I think that's a loaded question. Like, who other than attorneys are going to say we need more lawyers, right? But
I'm not going to advocate. I'm not advocating for more lawyers. I'm just trying to kind of understand: is the fact that most people encounter these legal issues at some point in their life, is it a problem that needs to be solved, or is it just that's just the way it is and it's okay?
No, it's not okay. So what is happening is the outcomes for someone that's not represented are worse, factually worse. Not just like we're attorneys, we feel like we're important, so we should be involved. When you look at outcomes in most legal areas, someone that's navigating on their own is going to have a worse outcome.
Okay.
As a society, if we believe we have a fair and just legal system, which is, I think, one of the premises in which we operate under, it is not a fair and just legal system if individuals are having to go in and navigate these systems on their own without representation, particularly when there's representation on the other side. So when we look at issues like when we're talking about consumer, there's no creditor that's walking in without being represented, but all of our debtors, the vast majority of debtors, the vast majority of renters have no one that's representing their interests. So no, it absolutely is something that we should address. To your question, I think two things. One, about and this is pretty consistent across the country. If you look at non-legal services attorneys, only about 50% of attorneys do report doing pro bono work. So there's still a lot. We could close some of that gap if every attorney actually did pro bono. The other issue, I guess, to just highlight is there is a movement around right to counsel in civil cases. And there have been, and it's gaining some steam. And in Maryland this year, they passed a right to counsel in these failure to pay rent cases. And so they're in the process of identifying funding and how that's going to stand up. But there is a movement in some certain legal issues to say, we actually should make sure that this individual is getting represented when it has to do with these really fundamentally important issues like the housing, family, etc.
All right. So let me ask this kind of like devil's advocate type question. Let's say every attorney in the country did do some pro bono work. Would that kind of solve the problem that you're identifying, which is that unrepresented people get worse outcomes than represented people, represented by a lawyer, right? Could the current sort of crop of attorneys that are out there in the United States collectively do enough pro bono work to solve that problem?
The question you're asking kind of goes into a broader context, right? There are two ways in which the legal system is, I think, struggling in terms of providing fair and just outcomes. The most, sort of the conversation we're having is around the issue around being represented. And then there are the sort of secondary issues of even when you're represented, is our system providing fair and just outcomes? I think if we had a more, no, I don't think that if every attorney in this country did pro bono, that's going to fix even that first problem. But I think it could have a substantial impact. So for example, in Maryland, if you look at the entire pool of everyone that would income qualify for legal services. So we're not talking about everyone that needs an attorney. We're talking about individuals that are at 50% of Maryland median income. That entire pool of folks and all of the legal services providers in Maryland, us and all the others, we're only serving about 20%. of individuals that actually qualify for legal services. 80% of those folks are not getting representation because we have no way to fill that gap. So we could make the gap smaller if we had more engagement with attorneys across the country, because the numbers that are in Maryland are very consistent to across the country.
Okay. So what I hear you saying is that attorneys doing more volunteer work, more pro bono work would help put a dent in it, as you say, but that if there is a problem of unrepresented people encountering the legal system and getting bad outcomes, that the real solution has to come from reform of the legal system itself. Is that a fair summary of your position?
Yes, that is an accurate summary.
Okay, so maybe let's talk a little bit about that. What are the types of reforms that you would put in place if you had a magic wand? Right? Just, from all the years that you've spent trying to help people navigate through these legal systems, what are the types of reforms that you think would help?
You're asking such hard questions this morning.
I think these are
great.
I think these are the softball questions. These are.
Oh goodness!
I'm assuming that like you're the executive director of this organization. You must think about these types of issues, right? When you're setting your agenda for the day or the year or the decade, right?
That's true. Yes.
If you had your wish list of things that you could change in the legal system to make it work better for, for low income people, but not just low income people, right? Middle class people who are just encountering these issues. What are the reforms that you would put in place if you had the magic wand?
No, it's a greght question. I'm just giving you a hard time. And I certainly think about it. I'm just trying to think of how do I speak about it in a helpful way. I think two things. One, as I mentioned, the system was designed for judges and attorneys. And I think we really would have to profoundly think about the system and recognize the substantial barriers in understanding legal forms, understanding legal concepts. I think as working in this space, it's easy for us to start thinking like, oh, this is just really obvious. And it's not. Every client I work with, no matter what legal issue I'm working on with them, these are hard concepts because this is not anything that's in their day-to-day life. So something that makes sense to us because we've been trained and we have spent time in this space just doesn't. So having a legal form, for example, something like criminal record expungement, that's a very easy process. I can do the analysis, I can figure out what's expungible, I prepare the petition, but really walking through that petition with a client and helping them understand what their options are and why this thing's expungible and why this thing isn't, and this is the form that they have to fill out. It's very complicated. And so just like having approachable forms, like that's not enough. I mean, it's helpful, but it's not enough. We really have to think about how do we create a legal system that's based on reality for folks and more common sense as opposed to this legal structure that we have, because folks just generally don't understand. I always liken it to like when I'm going to a doctor and like, I feel like when I'm at a doctor, they could say like, the sky is blue. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't understand what they're saying because they're a doctor. And so when we as lawyers are talking to folks about the judicial system and they're trying to navigate the judicial system, like they don't have a whole lot to pull from about how they navigate the system. So I think we really have to think about, if we're going to meaningfully have folks be able to engage, we really have to think very differently about how the legal structure is created in the first place.
Does that mean mostly taking complexity out and trying to make these legal regimes simpler?
I think where we can. I mean, I think that we have to think about some of these things in different ways. I think there's absolutely some areas that we could make simpler. But then there's also areas I think we have to reckon with, like no one that is facing a custody proceeding that they are, trying to make sure that they have access to their child should be navigating that on their own. Like that is inherently complex. If you're dividing a family and you're figuring out how how the relationship's going to continue in that family, like that's maybe something we can't make simple, but that's maybe something we should make sure that no one's left. Like how does someone that's not represented navigate discovery and interrogatories and the financial forms and meeting the deadlines and cross-examining or objecting, like that's.
But if we start with the assumption that we're not going to get a lawyer for everybody, that that's not going to be the end result. There aren't enough lawyer hours to literally give everybody a lawyer to help them navigate that process. There's going to be people who are going to have to navigate that process without a lawyer. So how, let's just take custody as an example. What could we do to change the process for determining custody in a way that would make that process more user-friendly for people who don't have lawyers?
I'm not sure you can.
Mm-hmm.
I think in some of these really critically important complex areas, I think, maybe the best we could do is kind of have a bit of a triage where, speaking of right to counsel, like maybe that's an area where someone that's otherwise not going to be able to afford an attorney, like maybe that's something, maybe that should come with some level of assistance or support where
Right.
There might be other areas that we could make the system easier.
I mean, I'll say something sort of heretical for a lawyer, maybe, but when I hear you talking, the thought I have is, gee, the real underlying problem here is we just have too much law in our society. We are an overly legalized country at this point, and that's why everybody needs a lawyer. It's not that like living life requires a lawyer, right? I mean, humans lived for millions of years without lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
It's that we happen to live in a society now that is very law-centric in certain ways, that every aspect of our life now has become infused with a bunch of legal rules that have just sort of aggregated over time. It's not like the system fell out of the sky the way it is today. It's just the way it's evolved over 200 plus years of our country, that these laws have sort of accumulated and aggregated and become what they are today. And we just live in a very sort of, I guess I would say, a sort of law dense society. So what would you say to the suggestion? Let's just take custody as an example. Like, is there a path to just delegalizing that? In other words, instead of it being a complicated court procedure to decide who gets custody of children when there's a divorce or the parents aren't married, that we just come up with some other way of doing it. We just have, I don't know, just sort of lay mediators who just try to work it out and just decide, or something like that, and make it less formal and less rule-based. What would you say to that? What would be the pluses and minuses of maybe that type of system?
First off, I love the way that you described it, because in terms of this sort of law dense society, because that's exactly what's happening. And so as we work with particularly lower income individuals, like they can't help but being caught up within these variety of systems. But no, and I would say in the time that I've worked at MVLS, one of the things that I've really come to understand is, for most of the issues that we work on, like it's just so much better if those folks can work it out without coming to us, because the law, a lot of folks are looking for the law to fix things the law is not going to fix it. Mm-hmm. And so, like in family law cases, like no one comes out happy in a divorce and custody case. Like there's no win in that. It is a sad and difficult moment in someone's life. And so a lot of our family law attorneys do this. I don't think in terms of negotiating and mediating and coming to an outcome that's going to work best for that family. I think family law attorneys would say that needs to be done by an attorney, but I think you could conceptually, like, how do we shift this from an antagonistic process to say, this is the next step in this family's life and it's different, but let's really focus on how an outcome's going to work for all of them, as opposed to let's get in court and beat each other up, and so that there's a winner, because there will not be a winner in family law cases.
Right. So, I mean, again, I think you kind of hit on it. And you say, look, the legal system is what it is because the legal system was itself developed by lawyers and judges.
Yeah.
And I think as lawyers, you've gone through all this time and expense of becoming a lawyer and learning, going to law school, taking the LSAT, taking the bar exam, and all of that, I think, pushes lawyers to think that the solution to whatever problem they see in the world, that the solution is legal necessarily. Like that's the default position. Like we need more rights, we need less rights, we need more procedure, we need less procedure. That's how we as lawyers think about solving problems. And I think it's that mindset of like, let's think of everything as a legal problem that leads to kind of this situation where everything has been legalized. And then the vast majority of our legislators are lawyers. The vast majority of our presidents are lawyers, right? And so the sort of lawyer mindset has really permeated our government at every level for many, many years. And it's kind of led to this very, again, like I say, law dense society. Maybe that's just sort of like a one-way ratchet. Like it's very hard to ratchet that back. It's easy to advocate to pass a new law. You very rarely see groups advocating to just repeal whole areas of the law, right? You just never see it, even though that might actually do more good than passing like new laws.
Yeah.
But we always tend to think of as rights, particularly those of us who are sort of on the plaintiff side or on the progressive side of politics. We often think of things as very about rights. We want our clients to have rights.
Mm-hmm.
And like one of the reasons why civil litigation is so complicated is because there are lawyers like us who want our clients in those systems to have rights, to be able to do discovery, to be able to, have fair judicial proceedings and to have a right of appeal from every decision that we don't like, and so on and so forth. But each of those things adds a layer of complexity that we as lawyers understand, but our clients don't.
Right.
So I often think, even though I'm a guy who represents plaintiffs mostly, even when I'm in the middle of these big pieces of civil litigation, I often think, gee, I understand why the process works the way it does, but is it really that helpful at the end of the day? Like, is all of this discovery we're going through, all of this motions practice, all of these appeals, do we actually get to a better result at the end of the day? Or are we just adding complexity and transaction costs and time, to the process? So I don't know, that's my big picture rant. But let me kind of kick it back to you. I mean, one of the things you had said was that your organization, you do client services, but that you also, I guess, do some more high level policy work in terms of trying to make laws more equitable. So maybe say a word about that. What are the efforts that your organization takes, kind of that are more maybe policy oriented, and do those kind of go to these issues of legal access and legal services?
When I came to MVLS as the foreclosure prevention person, we really were focused on just providing the legal services. And I kept looking at these systems that were really not working well for the clients that I had. There was, I kind of came in thinking, oh, there's been this reckoning and the abuses that had been done by the banks and the servicers. Like I was going to be able to write that. I was going to be able to make a real difference. And the reality is the laws that we had just didn't permit that. Like a lot of times I was just really making sure that at least someone was responding, that there was someone was going to look at their modification, but there was not a lot that I could do. And for me, it was just like, well, that's not super satisfying to just help someone through a bad process. And sometimes that's what we do. Like what we do as attorneys, certainly working in the space, working with low income folks. Like there are just times we're not going to be able to successfully resolve their issue for them. but it sort of planted this seed of like, okay, yes, we're going to continue to provide these legal services, but what if the system doesn't work for them? What if it's having an impact that no one's really thinking about or seeing? And so where that really took seed is when we expanded our work to do tax sale related work. And in Baltimore City, at that time, someone could lose their house over a $250 delinquent property tax or a $350 delinquent water bill. So what we were finding is we had a number of older adults that didn't have a mortgage, but they had fallen behind on their property tax. So, I mean, the inequity of losing your house and all the equity in your house over $250 property tax bill, like that hopefully sounds crazy to your listeners, because that seems like the first time I heard it, I just didn't even believe that was possibly true. Both for the terrible outcome for the client, but also like why would Baltimore City like take a homeowner that's invested in the community and take their house from them for that kind of, like, that just from a societal standpoint is terrible policy. And so we started to help these clients, but we were like, no, wait, we have to look at like how this is actually working. And so we've spent the last 10 years changing the law. So I told you, $250 for delinquent property tax. Over time, we were able to increase that. Baltimore City has a terrible history of misbilling, and their water. So they were taking people's houses at the same time as they were misbilling people for their water bill. And so we got water pulled out of tax sale. Over time, we've been able to continue to pull other folks out of the tax sale process, but also work with the city, work with the Department of Public Works, work with the Department of Finance, work with the Department of Housing to say, look, there's other ways we could do this. Like, we understand folks need to pay their taxes. We understand folks need to pay their water bill. We're not advocating for that, but let's actually work together for a system that's going to help accomplish your goals, keep people in their homes, get the resources that they need. So at the end of the day, we all are better and have a better outcome. And that really has grown in a variety of areas that we work. So around criminal record relief, we've looked at, hey, if we have, particularly in Baltimore City, if we have this huge part of our population that can't get a job because of items they have on their criminal record, and particularly in Maryland, when you look at criminal records, it's anything that anyone has ever been charged for, not found guilty of, just charged for. It creates this terrible problem. This is a tremendous barrier to employment. And so we've looked at different areas and how do we both look at it legislatively and make changes, but how do we think about it as like agency advocacy. How do we work with these agencies and really highlight there's this practice that you're doing and it seems like an okay practice, but let us demonstrate to you through our clients how it's really impacting residents. And this isn't a good policy for anyone and the way that it's being implemented.
Yeah. And Baltimore, I lived in Baltimore at earlier points in my life, and I know and love that city very much. But I know that in Baltimore, it's hard to escape race as a factor in anything in the legal or political world. It was a border state city, and one that was fairly segregated from a housing perspective for most of its history. How do you see sort of race issues impacting the types of legal and policy issues that you tackle?
Well, first, let me say we are statewide, and we do see these structural racism issues beyond Baltimore. But Baltimore is, I think if you're paying attention at all, it's impossible to see that overlap between structural racism issues, the legal system, and our city. Part of our understanding was getting out into the communities that we work in. And it does not take long when we're focusing on the lower income neighborhoods in Baltimore City to start really grounding yourself in the financial barriers that are making most of those neighborhoods Black and brown neighborhoods. And so it was helpful for me having the housing background that I did to come with that understanding of the housing segregation, Baltimore City being one of the very first in the country of having segregated laws, block busting, inability to wealth build because of all of the housing barriers, to start understanding the context of when we see something today, it's got that sort of iceberg underneath it of all of the barriers that get us to where we are today. So that, we already had some understanding of that. And then after George Floyd was murdered, and we really, as an organization, knew that we needed to start more proactively addressing these legal issues. The first thing that I did is I looked at our client population because I wanted to start sharing what I knew anecdotally, which is that most of our Black individuals are overrepresented in every legal issue that we help with. And that's not because Black people are more inclined to have these issues because of their race. It is because of their race, but because of structural racism, not because they as human beings are more likely to file for bankruptcy, right? And so I started pulling our numbers, and it's in everything that we do, and in some of the areas in which we provide representation in for things like expungement, workforce development, tax sale, we're somewhere in the 80 to 90% of our clients are Black, because of this history of disinvested communities, because of segregation, because of over policing. There's just this litany of challenges and barriers that then overlap with these individuals then being pulled into the legal system. And you were talking about it's darn hard to be a human being and not be impacted by the legal system. But for the clients that we're represented, particularly our Black and brown clients, they're having all of these additional barriers cross with their path that pull them, more often into the legal system as well.
Right. I mean, so structural racism is sort of a phrase that gets bandied about a lot in the last few years, in almost every field that I've encountered. And, maybe give our listeners an example of, sort of a very concrete example of sort of a legal issue that a client of MVLS might face, where that perspective sort of helps you understand the issue.
Sure. I think one of the things we really try to elevate is things that seem entirely neutral on their face, often end up not being. So one of the issues we work on a lot, as I mentioned, is tax sale, where the vast majority of our homeowners that are at risk of tax sale are Black homeowners. Often for most of our folks to avoid tax sale, they need to have the homeowner's property tax credit. And in order to have the homeowner's property tax credit, you need to be on the deed to your property. So for individuals like myself, that seems like a pretty easy, clear path. So for example, when my mom passes away, and for your listeners and not your viewers, I'm white. And so, I have a house already. My grandparents were able to buy a house and didn't have any sort of segregation issues for their house. They were able to get an FHA loan. They were able to, build wealth. And when they passed, they were able to pass some of those wealth on to my parents. And my parents were able to get an FHA loan, and they were able to build wealth. They were able to, put me through college. And when my mom passes, that house is going to pass as financial asset to me, because I have a house and my siblings have a house, because we were all able to wealth build because we didn't have the kind of barriers as a white family in Ohio that a Black family in Baltimore City would have had. So if you contrast that with one of our clients who are older adults, their parents or grandparents had to overpay for a property, have a disrepaired house, not in as good condition. They live in a neighborhood where they've not had the same educational opportunities, and they've not had the same employment opportunities. So their ability to wealth build is greatly diminished. So you've got this house, it's not in great condition, it's not a very substantial asset. And for Black families, that's almost always the only asset they have. Their children, like me, often have to live in that house. They're not able to go and purchase their own house because of education and employment limitations and the inability to wealth build and wealth transfer. And so grandparent dies, and often the other thing is they move back in to take care of the older adult. That grandparent or parent passes away. This person lives in the house it's their house. They live in it for decades. House falls in disrepair. They need a new roof. They go to get a home repair loan, and they can't because their name isn't on the deed to the property. And so the steps that they need to take, opening an estate, paying those fees, having a clean lien certificate, meaning they don't owe anything to the city. Every part of that is a tremendous barrier to them because there is no wealth there to pull from. As opposed to when my mom passes away, I'm going to get the value of the house. So it's not a problem for me to pay those fees, and then I'm going to get money from it. For our clients in Baltimore City, there's this, particularly our Black homeowners, there's this history of overpaying, undervaluing, not being able to wealth build. And when we look at those houses, they've got to come up with all this money to just be able to legally, you were talking about this, how we've created all of these systems. This person's lived in this house for decades. Like realistically, they're the homeowner, but legally they're not the homeowner.
And just to be clear, the reason they're not the homeowner is why? Because when somebody died and somebody else in the family just stayed in the home and continued to live there, when the original owner of the house died, they did not go through an estate proceeding, and therefore the house was never legally transferred to the next generation. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. So they didn't open an estate because most folks don't know how to do that. We've already talked about, right? They don't have an attorney to do it. And then there are costs to it. So to open an estate is a couple $100. You have to publish, which is $100. You have to get a nominal bond, which is $100. And then to record a new deed, that's about $110. And you can't owe the city any property tax, water bill, environmental citations. And so even if they want to, it is, for those of us that have got to have with more sort of race and financial privilege, these seem like not tremendous barriers. Okay, I'll come up with the, $1,000, but like I'm going to get a third of the value of this house, like in real money, right? Because I don't need my mom's house, as opposed to our clients who have never been able to wealth build because of all of the sort of structural racism issues that we're talking about, right? So there's no money to draw upon to actually do those things. And then they're not getting a house. It is their house. It is the place in which they have resided for decades.
And then you're dealing with the sort of the downstream consequence of that, which is now somebody a generation or two later doesn't pay a water bill, and they're in this tax sale proceeding. So thinking about, kind of what is the solution to that problem? Is the solution to the problem to make the tax sale proceeding go away? In other words, we just shouldn't have a rule that if you don't pay your water bill, that your house doesn't get foreclosed on, that there just has to be some other remedy for that other than your house gets foreclosed on? Or is the problem we really need to dramatically simplify our probate proceedings so that just getting the house in the name of the next generation is not complicated and costly? Or is it both?
It's maybe yes and no and maybe. No, we're not advocating that folks shouldn't pay their taxes. That's not what we're advocating.
No, I didn't. That wasn't one of the solutions I suggested.
or not, we're not advocating like if there's no penalty for someone to not pay their taxes in terms of tax sale. But what we are advocating for, and so it goes to the probate as well, is that we, just like we were talking about, looking at the judicial system in a way, recognizing that folks are often pro se. What we're advocating for is, when you look at these policies and practices, we need to, historically, we've looked at this from a perspective that works for people like me, who have resources, who can afford probate, who's going to inherit my mom's house. Like, that's how we think about these things. And so when we look at how these processes work, we really need to come at this from a different perspective, to say, like, that is some people's experience, but for those other folks, and often based on structural racism, this system doesn't work. So what are we looking at differently? So to get to your question, so when we look at tax sale, for example, we're actually we're working with a tax sale work group to say, let's reform the system. Instead of just saying, like, you're delinquent, you lose your house, what if we said, we've identified you're in trouble here. Let's get you the resources you need, and not necessarily just the financial resources, but let's get you connected to the legal services program so they can resolve the deed issue for you. Let's get you connected to housing counselors so you can look for assistance. Let's get you connected to other services so that we can actually keep you in your home, which is a better outcome for the community and for the city. Like, oftentimes these policies and practices are very short-sighted and harm the city as well. And so with like probate, for example, this clean lien certificate, like, we've been advocating that you don't, if we got away with that, we removed it, you could still keep a lien on the property. You could still, we're not saying you have to just like get rid of people, what they might owe, but there are different ways we could structure these things that actually would work better for and account for this history of individuals that have not been able to wealth build in the same way, and keep them in their homes.
Right. I mean, I guess I'll go back to my pitch about we live in a society that is just too dense with laws. I think it's inevitable that if you live in a society that is more dense with laws, that is going to make things harder on poor people relative to people who are not poor, because the poor people aren't going to have access to lawyers. They're going to have fewer resources to deal with these issues. They don't even have the time to deal with them, and so on and so forth. And in a society where race and economic status historically are tied, that's going to have implications for racial equity as well. But that the sort of the underlying problem, I guess, that I see in that story that you just told, right, is that at the moment where there was a generational transfer of the house, that the legal system was inaccessible to that family for some and because of a combination of lack of financial resources to go hire a lawyer and the complexity of the system that made it necessary to hire the lawyer in the first place, right? As opposed to just having a system where probate issues could be handled very simply, and there was just some very, very simple system for getting the house legally transferred to the next generation, so they didn't even need a lawyer, right? Like, that would have been that would have made things better. And then there are all these sort of like add-on ripple problems that flow from the fact that they didn't go through the probate proceeding because the probate proceeding was too complicated, too expensive.
Well, and that's true. And that is some of the advocacy we're doing as well, is to try to streamline it even further. But also this, I have expressed, my frustrations with the city, working with the city itself, that so often when we ask a question, it's like, it feels like their response is like, how's the quickest way we can get to know, as opposed to saying like, oh, let's think about this. Is there another way to do this? Is there another way to account for that? Maybe this way we look at it doesn't work for everyone. And we're not asking for a fundamental change in how we do things. What we're asking for is, let's let's think about this. Could we be creative? Again, in a way that works for the city or for the state, but also works for the individual. And that, we overlap with that work because of our clients and because the laws that are passed then have to be implemented, right? And there's a lot of room and nuance for how policy, how laws are implemented. And all too often, it's not from a lens of individuals like our clients and how maybe we need to consider different approaches based on their experiences.
So it sounds to me like a lot of the legal problems that your organization deals with are sort of downstream problems that have an upstream cause. And sometimes the best solution to a problem is to not have the problem in the first place. So, tell me a little bit about some of the community work that you do to try to help people avoid the legal problems in the first place.
Particularly around our housing and consumer work, we've found that if we can obviously get someone to avoid the problem, they're going to be much better off than coming to us. So as important as I think attorneys are and as important as I think MVLS is, sometimes the best service that we can provide is just to keep them away from us. And so that really started first looking at our housing work. And we've talked a lot about probate and tax sale and foreclosure, and making sure that we were getting out into the communities that we work with and helping them do their estate planning, helping them set up that opportunity, doing life estate deeds, getting them to create a way to pass that asset and start breaking that the tremendous wealth gap that we have between white and Black families. And so that's really been a premise in which we've built much of our community partnering work since. And then most recently, we've talked a bit about COVID funds. There are some pretty significant federal funds that are going out to the states and can be used for a variety of housing, particularly housing programs. And in Maryland, because of some of the advocacy work that we do, we were really able to work with the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, who had envisioned these resources to be focused on mortgage foreclosure, which is, of course, near and dear to my heart and something that's very important. But we said, hey, how about you take an expansive look? How about you really look at what the needs are? Could we use these funds for tax sale? Could we use it for home repair? Could we use it for ground rent redemption, which is this quirky thing that we have in Baltimore City? How about we really think more holistically about how those resources are available? And then how do we make sure that someone actually knows about these resources and utilizes these resources? And so we were able to really utilize community partnerships that we've built over a number of years. We take very seriously making sure that we're good partners, that we always do what we say we're going to do, and really build that trust. And so what we've been able to do in a variety of neighborhoods in Baltimore City is to put together what we call these resource packets. And it's got information about the Housing Assistance Fund. It's got information about water programs, about estate planning, a variety of ways, and say, hey, here's resources. Please utilize them. If you don't know how to utilize them, contact. We'll help you figure out how to utilize them, but please utilize them because they can literally make the difference in preserving your house. And so we've been able to partner with community programs, and it's been a really neat project. We actually just did one last week in a neighborhood in Baltimore City called Johnston Square, and we distributed 950 of these resource packets, 500 to homeowners and 450 to renters. And it's literally the community members who are going door to door, doing the door knocking, having conversations with their neighbors, sort of a no strings attached. Here's just some really helpful resources. Here's a program that we trust to send you to. And we've been doing it all around the city. The nice thing is we've been able, as part of the outreach funding, is to also be able to pay. We do a sort of dollar per door payment to the community members as well. So we're, investing in the community members, and really trying to make sure they have the resources available so that they know about us and know that we're a resource, but hopefully never come to us in terms of the issues related to housing and consumer issues.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think it kind of shows where sometimes legal services lead into or overlap with social work or social services. I know there's a great organization here in DC, Bread for the City. I don't know if you deal with other organizations like yours,
Yes.
but Bread for the City does a lot of that kind of in the trenches legal work, but they also have a big sort of social work side and even a healthcare side and sort of a food bank as well that they run. And so that model has always been, law is just one part of a bigger issue, and it's not always the right way to approach the issue. That sometimes the problem is really something else. So I think that's great that you're doing that. If somebody wanted to get some help from your organization, they were faced with one of these different types of legal issues that we've talked about today, and we're looking for somebody to help them with it. How would they find you?
The best place is to go to our website, which is MVLS, which is the first of each letter, Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service. So it's mvlslaw.org. Or just Google us. You're going to find us that way as well. But we have both phone intake and we have online intake. And all of that information's on our website, all of the programs we have. In addition to the sort of 6 areas, we have a number of specific projects, and all of that information's on our website.
Do you still have a physical location, or is everything done through either the internet or phone calls now?
We do have a physical site, but we don't do in-person intake just because we're such a small staff. So we do our intake either phone, online, or we're out in the community on a regular basis doing intake at the various sites that we're at as well.
And do you do any sort of publicity through social media? Do you guys have social media pages or Twitter accounts or any of that?
We do. We have a very, very active Facebook page. That's the easiest way to find us. We also have LinkedIn and Instagram.
Okay, great. I will, in the show notes to the podcast, we will put links to your website. And if you want us to, we can also put links to your social media pages so that if anybody listening to this podcast wants to find you, they can find you. And then I would ask, if there are lawyers listening to this and they're in the Maryland area and are interested in doing some pro bono work through your organization, what would be the right way for them to get in touch and offer their time?
Exact same way.
Okay.
And so we have a number of volunteer resources, volunteer application, everything on our website as well. And let me just put a plug for non-Maryland listeners. What we do in Maryland is not unique, that there are these sorts of services everywhere that both can utilize volunteers. And of course, clients can get help as well. And so if someone's listening outside of Maryland, I encourage them to reach out to their state's legal services programs too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, great. Well, like I said, we'll put all of that contact information in the show notes. So it's there if anybody listening to this wants to find out more about the Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Services or needs their help, or if you're a lawyer who would like to donate some of your pro bono time to them. It sounds like they have lots of useful and interesting work that you could do to help somebody. So with that, I think we will turn to the last segment of the podcast. And as you know, here on the Garrulous Gavel, we always try to end with something that isn't law, that is a little more personal and lighthearted to our guest. And when I asked Susan what she wanted to talk about, she right away said, I am a big fan of the National Park Service. And, my first thought is like, being a lawyer, I was like, oh, do they have some like really good regulations or something that you're a fan of? But no, that's not what she meant. She meant that she actually likes to go visit parks around the country. So I think you've already told us that interest kind of started when you were young and your parents would take you to visit national parks. Is that right?
Yep.
And then what have you done over the years to sort of pursue that interest? I mean, you told me some little factoid yesterday when we chatted that I hope you'll mention here. But, what have you done to sort of pursue that interest over the years?
I am so excited that I get to talk about the National Park Service as part of like my day job. So this is amazing. So it was really my parents that really planted that seed. We would go to the Smoky Mountains, and in my office, I have a poster from the Smoky Mountains as a reminder of my first NPS love. but what I have discovered over time, I certainly was well aware of. I think most of us are well aware of the big national parks, the Yellowstone and Yosemite and the Smoky Mountains. But I've really come to understand how broad the NPS sites are, and have the nature, of course, is amazing, but there are all of these other historical sites. There's, sites focused on women's rights, civil rights. I've been out to Manzanar, which was one of the Japanese internment camps in California. The breadth of what the National Park Service saves and the stories they have to tell is really amazing. And so I think I shared with you that I have I'm going to out myself here. So NPS geeky, but I have an Excel spreadsheet in which I track all of the national parks, and there's 400 plus national parks. And I've been to almost 300 of them. And I've been to all of the big national parks. I've been to all of the ones within the continental United States. And I had my first trip planned to the Virgin Islands that would have been in May 2020, and of course got canceled with COVID. So that's I'm academically retired, but my next goal is to get myself to Alaska and Hawaii and American Samoa and the Virgin Islands, which is still on the list.
And you have about 100 to go.
So right, so this gets very specific. So of the ones that we consider the national parks, the big ones, Yellowstone, Yosemite, there's about 15 or so that I have left, and most of those are in Alaska. But then of the whole NPS system, that's where you get into the 400 and some.
So you're drawing a distinction there between like the big parks, you say, versus the other ones. Like is within the, I just out of curiosity, like within the NPS system, is a national park something different from some other
a national historic site that's maintained under the NPS? Yes, exactly. So there's
different classifications.
Yeah, so there's like 62 or so that are considered national parks, but then there's like 400 units within the National Park Service. So I just sort of call them the big national parks. But yeah, so that's the distinction. So of those officially designated national parks, I've been to all of those except the ones outside of the continental U.S.
And you said there's 62 of those?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then, so that leaves like 340 other sites that the NPS administers. Are the other ones tend to be more like historical sites?
Yes. It's also like national seashores, national rivers, other sort of designations that are see, you're like, wow, she's really gone geeky now. So, but there's all these other kinds of designations as well.
Okay, well, that's great. So, look, we teased that you were going to tell a story about your alligator encounter that is sort of NPS related. So go for it. Tell us the alligator story.
Yeah. Well, and clearly I survived it because I'm here to tell the tale, right? One of the things, just so your listeners know, the NPS website is very helpful. And anytime you're traveling, you can hop on there and be like, oh, I'm going to be in the state. What national parks are in the area? So my wife and I were driving down to Key West to go to Dry Tortugas. I really like the going to the NPS sites that are really remote and difficult to get to. One, for the challenge, but also the folks that are there really appreciate being there because they had to work really hard to get there. And so on our way down to Key West to go to Dry Tortugas, we also stopped at the Everglades, which is a national park. And Everglades is lovely. They have a lot of alligators, which is not a thing we generally deal with here in Maryland. And we were taking a walk, and it's a normal, just small walking path. And on one side is a swamp land, and on the other side is this channel. And like the alligators are right there. You can see them like 5-6 feet away, which is a little bit disconcerting. But the rangers were like, no, it's okay. Alligators generally not aggressive if you're not like a small dog, or tragically occasionally like a small child. Like like fully formed humans, you're not really at risk. And we're walking along, and all of a sudden this weird sound like and starts happening, and we're both just pretending like we don't hear it, right? Because if you if you don't hear it, it's like not happening. And then it gets louder and then it gets louder. And like we turn around and maybe 10 feet behind us, this big alligator comes out from the channel up onto the walking path. And we were like, that's a little bit troubling. So we turned back around and we're walking towards the visitor center. And again, like the only way to get there is on this narrow path. And all of a sudden, we start hearing the same sound like over and over and over coming from alligators that are between us and the visitor center. And so if the pattern's going to stay the same, that means those alligators are coming up onto the path and we have nowhere to go. And so, I'm an attorney. As you've pointed out, we're pretty like reasonable, thoughtful people. My wife's an accountant. They're kind of known for their, very strategic, intentional thinking. And I pause and I'm like, okay, I'm going to think about this. I'm going to come up with a plan. And I turn around to discuss this plan with my wife and I can't find her. And it's because she has completely abandoned me and taken off running up the path to the visitor center. So I just, kept calm very quickly. Didn't run. I didn't panic, but I very quickly walked back up to the visitor center. I have all my limbs. Everything worked out fine. So no alligator attacks.
Yeah. No, well, that's good. I'm glad you survived. And often these kind of scary near-death experiences, although they are frightening in the moment, after the fact, they make most entertaining stories, right?
Well, and it's given me leverage for years with my wife because I can just keep telling her and remind her about how she abandoned me to the alligator. So it's like a good, funny story. And I have this, permanent leverage as well.
Excellent. You would hope that the National Park Service wouldn't just send you down a trail where your chances of being eaten by an alligator were high, but you never know. I mean, you do hear about people getting, seriously hurt or injured in the national park. Sometimes it definitely happens. I mean, people wander off trails or even on the trails. You are encountering actual wilderness, and for us city dwellers, we're not necessarily well equipped to deal with that sometimes.
No, that's entirely true. We've been to a number of places with like big drop-offs, right? And like there's no, in cities, we've got all of these guardrails and all of the, and when you're out there, you occasionally the folks sort of just go over the side. And so you like you do need to use a lot of good like survivor common sense when you're in the parks.
Hey, whoever designed and built the Grand Canyon, it was before the ADA was passed. It's definitely non-compliant.
Yes. Yeah. And it's fascinating. Like you'll see people like even where there's fences, they'll climb over fences to get a better photo. And it's like, I will stay on this side. I will have a lovely view of the Grand Canyon and I will not go off the side of the cliff.
Well, the national park system is great. And I've been to some of those parks, not 300, not anywhere close to that.
Well, you better get started.
But I'll have to set up the Excel spreadsheet. Maybe if you have a template you could send me, that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean they are great, and I've had a lot of fun and interesting experiences at those parks as well. And in Maryland where we are, although we don't have too many deadly animals, which is one of the things I like about Maryland.
Yep.
We have lots of historical sites and even a couple of national parks nearby. And
I will say there are a number of NPS units in Maryland, so worth checking out.
Sure. Well, I think with that, I am going to say thank you very much for your time. This has been a really interesting and illuminating conversation. And like I said, we'll put all of the information for people to get in touch with you in the show notes. And so, Susan, just thank you for your time. And I wish you and the Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Services all the best of luck as you continue to do great work.
Thank you so much for the opportunity just to think about and discuss these issues today.
Very good. And with that, we will say goodbye until next time from the Garrulous Gavel. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Garrulous Gavel. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. You can always find us at garrulousgavel.com. If you'd like to send feedback or suggest a guest, please contact us at our email address, garrulousgavel@gmail.com, or on Twitter at garrulousgavel. Our cover art was created by artist and illustrator extraordinaire Joan Tico. Our theme music was written and performed by scientist and saxophonist extraordinaire Robert Tico, and our producer is the inimitable K.O. Myers of Particulate Media. See you next episode.